Hi everyone, Chris from Candy Digital here. And even though I'm in the space of PPC and paid social for a lot of my time, I'm really interested in the whole AI space. It's fair to say that it's changed a lot over these past few years. I remember when I was at writing SEO 3-4 years ago, and there were small murmurs about it, but it's nothing like what it is now. I think it's really interesting that the search landscape has become more segmented than before. More people are using it, and they're more comfortable with AI platforms like ChatGPT, Perplexity, Google Gemini, Grok, all of these things to find what they're looking for, whether that's searching for information, buying something, bit of social proofing or trust, whatever that might be, that information that they're looking for. They're more often turning to these platforms that spit out answers rather than just doing 10 on a page in Google. Whilst I think that search will always remain a behaviour, it's definitely one of those things that the platforms of which we will search on are definitely changing. You look at TikTok when that came out and how much it's now used for people searching for recipes and everything else. Don't get me wrong, Google is still here and it's still around, and it will be for a long time. The 92% search market share that we have at the moment, I'm not sure how long that's going to last. And it's really important that as brand marketeers and performance marketeers look at new areas, discovery, growth, and focus on areas that are going to get us and our clients the commercial return that we all need to survive. So I've developed a little bit of a tool that you can see here in front of you on the screen. My current way of thinking behind this tool was, how do I find a way of helping people find out why they're not showing on these LLMs? Why aren't ChatGPT and these Perplexity models recommending their business? And how can they show more? How can we extract information about the sentiment of the user? Is the ChatGPT model thinking us positively, negatively, or neutrally? Helping people to identify the strategic content opportunities that will help us to grow visibility in these LLMs, and just a tool that will enable brand to deliver content that's in the right spaces for the right people. So if I take this back to the beginning here, the way that it's all built is effectively in NAN or nan.io. I effectively self-host this, so I use something called Docker, free tool. What it means is that you don't have to use Nan's self-hosting tool, which costs maybe around $20 a month or something like that. So I've got Docker installed, and then I run a variation of this, as you can see in the kind of top there, my local host. What this effectively does is we've got a few daily triggers here that run every night at midnight, and it'll pull a number of queries for me together. So it'll pull things like, what is AO? Where's the best place to get a dishwasher? Who offers next day delivery on fridge freezers? Where can I get a Samsung TV? All these kind of queries. I think I've got 68 in here just as an initial test. It'll run them through ChatGPT as a model and Google Gemini as a model. It'll basically run through these, and each query will get chucked in a spat out. It'll process these queries into what is a meaningful data table and then save them into the respective Google Sheets. What we can then do is have another trigger that fires after this whole thing's been complete, normally within no more than 2 minutes. And what it'll do is it'll take all that data that we've just put into the sheet and everything else within the same Google Sheet, and it'll basically group that together in terms of one data style, so we're all using effectively as little tokens as we need to from the APIs running through Google Gemini. And I've asked it to produce some commentary on the back of that data analysis. So then what it'll do is it'll condense that again and save that commentary to the Google Sheets. So in essence, what it's doing is it's looking at all the information within the ChatGPT and Google Gemini space, all of the data columns that I've asked it to pull together, and it'll spit out basically some commentary to say, this is going great, this is not going so great, and this is what I recommend you do to show more often in the LLMs. Once that's spat out to the Google Sheet, this is what it looks like. So you've got everything in there. You've got all the responses, the timestamps, the questions, and you can then start to see what's the brand mentioned, what's the sentiment of that brand, what was the model, and what competitors were mentioned as well. So you can see here that Currys are mentioned on occasion, Argos, John Lewis, B&Q, and we can tie those back to each individual query. All of this data is effectively gobbled up by our Looker Studio there at the start, and this is the output. So you can see for AO.com, which is my example here, and the reason I'm pulling them together is because I worked with them for 5 years, but you can see how they've got a visibility score of 70% for those 68 queries that we showed, which isn't so bad. You can see how often the brand showed for those 68 queries, what was the split between brand and generic searches. So as you'd expect, when you mention the brand, it shows up and it recommends and talks about them. You can see what platforms it was mentioned on. So you can see over time, I started to introduce Google Gemini, and that's why that sort of bumps up there. And interesting how many times competitors were mentioned as well. And that seems to be on the rise, particularly for the ChatGPT model. When we talk about brand sentiment, you can then understand, how do those trends change over time? Are these platforms thinking of the brand more positively or negatively? And in cases where the query was negative or triggered some bad sentiment, you then see what were the queries that triggered that, and maybe what can I look at? So for example, I did preload this with a few negative questions. Do AO installations ever go wrong? But then you can see some other kind of queries within that as well. So it's triggered twice as a negative sentiment for when someone searched for what is AO, which is interesting. What you can have a look at is all the queries that I've asked it to do to date, all of these questions. And again, in time, I want to make this list 10, 15 times longer. But you can also see the queries where the brand didn't show at all. So super generic ones like, what's the easiest way to recycle an old appliance? How do I find a good dishwasher for a family home? Or can I return a large appliance if it doesn't fit? All of these things are opportunities where AO could have pulled through, but didn't. And we can look at maybe what competitors took their place across these. So it gives us a few things that maybe we want to focus on if we were able to succeed a bit more within the LLM space. Within the competitor space, we can see in these queries how many times competitors showed, and also what competitors they were as well. So no surprises here that Curry seems to show more often than not. We've got John Lewis showing a couple of times, Argos, that kind of thing, and we've got this all counted here. Then we can break this down. So what competitors were mentioned for these queries where they showed. So there are some ones where, again, I've led it down a certain path by saying AO versus Argos, who has better deals. Well, actually, of course, it's going to mention Argos there and AO. But from a generic standpoint, questions like, what's the best online store for large electrical goods? You can see that Curry showed there. And again, we can split those all out to see who's showing for what queries. Once we've got all of this data, bundled it all together, this is effectively the commentary that the ChatGPT model, or Google Gemini in this case, spat out. So you can see there some things around the actual data set. For example, a lot is mentioned a lot, where the gaps are, what competitors within that space, what model performed the best, and also some weaknesses of the strategy. It's quite clear here that it's saying there's a lot of branded queries here, so of course brand's going to show. But equally, it's given us some advice into how we can enrich the training data, perhaps provide it with more of a comprehensive knowledge base. And one thing I'm really interested to do, particularly in this space, is look at every product or service that AO was to sell. TVs, laptops, washing machines, fridge freezers, everything. Think of every possible question and analyze it and see if it comes up with our brand. As you can imagine, this will lead to hundreds more queries within this particular data set. But I think it will give us a clearer picture of how many times a brand shows and where the gaps are in terms of its offering. Loads more that I want to do with this as well. I want to see if it reacts to different locations and knows where you are, says things differently if you're in London or Edinburgh. I want to introduce more models, so Llama, Claude, Perplexity and Grok, as well as including a lot of other things like Google AI Overview data. I want to be able to capture the link information that it sends people to understand what URLs is it suggesting. But then also on the back of that, understand if the intent of that traffic that is going through to your site through these chat models is actually more intent-based, or if it's just informational-based. Are people actually more likely to buy from you if they click through on that and then visit your site? So there's loads of stuff we can look at here, but it really is just the start. Hopefully this is interesting. To make it really clear, this tool is free for all of my current and future clients at Can-Do. And just to be clear, at Can-Do, we offer PPC and paid social performance, as well as the creative elements that come alongside that. So if your brand is struggling with anything in the digital marketing space and you feel like you need to get ads in front of the right people, then hopefully we're the guys to talk to. Have a look at this, check it out. If you have any questions on it, please do let me know. Otherwise, thank you for listening. Like I say, nan.io, Google Sheets and Looker Studios, all you need with the Docker app installed, or just get an NAN online subscription. Give it a go. If you want to learn more, just feel free to message me on LinkedIn. Thanks.